Hey everyone, we've got a great topic today that I love to talk about. Did you know that the resurrection of Jesus is one of the best attested events in ancient history? I'm not kidding here, seriously, totally. There is more manuscript evidence and other circumstantial evidence that supports the resurrection of Jesus than there is for just about any other event in ancient history. And when you really dig into it, it's just incredible. There's a lot to consider, and I actually wish I really had time to tell you about it, but even with what I am going to be talking about, I really have to limit the depth and detail that I get into for the sake of time. But before we get to that, first of all, I have a question for you. Have you ever asked yourself, how can I know that Christianity is true? Or how do I know that Christianity is right and other religions are wrong? Is it worth it for me to believe in Jesus? And those are fair questions, and actually I hope that you've been asking yourself those things so that you can come to a better informed and convicted sort of faith. Now, there is a lot that I could say about these questions, and if these questions really are bugging you, I ask you to please come and talk with me. We can go through that. I'll gladly discuss things in more depth and detail with you, but for right now, suffice it to say that the historical fact of Jesus' resurrection really helps to answer those questions. And I know that they do for me personally when I have my doubts and fears about these sorts of things. But because if Jesus rose from the dead, and all the historical and circumstantial evidence points to that, that means then that Christianity is founded on something much greater, in fact, much more supernatural or more real than any other religion is founded upon. And if that's the case, and if what the Bible says these things mean for us is true, then it's definitely worth it to believe in Jesus. Now, today's video will be diving back into the waters of Christian apologetics. You might remember that apologetics is that branch of Christian theology that is concerned with the defense or the proof of the Christian faith using things like reason, logic, science, archaeological or historical evidence, and so on, to prove something true, or even maybe to prove something untrue. But I especially find the apologetics that focuses on the resurrection of Jesus very appealing, because it involves the heart and core of the Christian faith, and as you know, that is bringing the gospel message that brings people to faith. And ultimately, that's why I really like it so much, because it's not just using reason and logic, and you can't reason and logic people into heaven, as I've said before, and I might say again in this video. It's because, well, you got the gospel there, which is powerful to save. So, anyway, there are many different ways to argue logically in favor of Christ's resurrection. And the one that I like the best is called the minimal facts approach. The MFA, for short, to the resurrection, was created by a Christian apologist named Gary Habermas, and it uses two criteria. First of all, those facts must be facts that have a lot of evidence in their favor. And number two, these facts must be universally, or at least nearly universally, agreed upon by scholars and historians who study the subject, including the skeptical ones. Now, I find the minimal facts approach useful because one thing that it really does, it helps to check a person's biases at the door, their bias. You know, if someone already believes in the resurrection of Jesus, that faith could lead them to interpret the evidence in such a way that it confirms their belief or bias. And if someone does not believe in the resurrection, that unbelief could lead them to interpret the evidence in such a way that it confirms their unbelief bias. But if the evidence leads someone with a vastly different set of beliefs toward the opposite conclusion that they wanted to arrive at, well, then there's a good chance that the conclusion is true. And this is something that happens when people study the resurrection, particularly those who are trying to disprove it. Now, there are 5 facts about Jesus that are nearly universally regarded as true, and the following video introduces us to them. Let's watch it.
Dude,
Hey, what's up?
what you reading?
The Bible.
You reading the Bible?
Yeah.
Dude, why are you reading the Bible? For class?
No, I just...
Okay, so you're just reading the Bible. You're just sitting here in a coffee shop in the 21st century using state-of-the-art technology to read ancient myths for no reason whatsoever.
Well...
Tell me something. Are you one of those super religious people who thinks Jesus actually rose from the dead?
Well, I do believe that.
Do you also believe in the Easter Bunny, Santa Claus, unicorns, Bigfoot? Ever been abducted by aliens? And do you buy into all those other ancient myths about dying and rising gods invented by primitive nomadic tribes back in the Bronze Age?
No.
Okay, so what's the difference between Jesus rising from the dead and all those other fairy tales?
Here's the difference. My belief in the resurrection of Jesus is rational. It's based on historical facts.
Facts? What facts?
Well, first, Jesus died by crucifixion.
Whoa, hold on. We don't even know if Jesus existed. Why should I believe your facts?
Well, because the 5 facts I'm going to give you are backed by so much historical evidence that most professional critical scholars who study the subject accept them as true. That includes skeptical atheist scholars.
Okay, so Jesus was a guy who actually existed and then got himself killed. So what?
That's the first fact. Second, his disciples were convinced that he rose from the dead and appeared to them. Third, Paul, a sworn enemy of the early Christians, suddenly became a Christian. Fourth, Jesus' skeptical brother James also became a Christian. And fifth, the tomb where they put Jesus' body was empty.
And those are well-established historical facts.
Right, but you can't just leave it there. These facts demand an explanation. Otherwise, you've got a big hole in human history.
Okay, here's an explanation. They all lied. It was a conspiracy, the most monumental prank ever perpetrated. His followers stole his corpse from the tomb and then started telling everybody he was alive.
That's the conspiracy theory. The problem is it doesn't explain the facts. How do a few spineless fishermen, cringing in fear for their lives, subdue a bunch of well-armed, professional Roman guards, roll away a 2-ton stone, steal a body, then hide it from a city swarming with people trying to find it? And why would they do it? The disciples had absolutely nothing to gain by lying about Jesus' resurrection. In fact, they were persecuted, and we have good historical evidence that 5 of them were martyred because of their claim that Jesus rose from the dead. Apparently not a single one of them ever recanted. People don't willingly die for something they know isn't true. They were there. They knew whether it was true or not.
All right, another theory. The disciples thought they saw Jesus alive after he died, but it was just wishful thinking. They were stressed and just kind of hallucinated.
The hallucination theory also lacks explanatory power. 500 witnesses saw Jesus at the same time, and the disciples touched him. Psychologists have shown that hallucinations don't work like that, nor does this explain the empty tomb.
Okay, look, maybe there's some other explanation, but the bottom line is dead people stay dead. Rising from the dead would be a supernatural event, a miracle, and science has proven that miracles don't happen.
Oh, really? When did that happen?
I don't know. I just kind of heard it somewhere.
Science has not disproven miracles. In fact, that would be impossible.
Why?
Science deals exclusively with natural phenomena, physical matter and material processes, right?
Yeah.
But a miracle, by definition, is not a natural phenomenon. It's supernatural.
So
a supernatural event would lie outside the boundaries of science. It's logically impossible for science to throw out any hypothesis that lies outside its boundaries.
why have I never heard this stuff before?
I don't know. Maybe because it's scary?
Scary?
Yeah. As long as Jesus rising from the dead is just a fairy tale, like Santa Claus and unicorns, it doesn't threaten my little world. But if it's a fact, if he actually did rise from the dead, that's huge. It's a total game changer. And that's why it's so hard to think about it objectively.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Big whoa.
All right, so here is a quick summary of the 5 minimal facts. Number 1, Jesus died by crucifixion. Number 2, his disciples were convinced that he rose from the dead and appeared to them. Number 3, Paul became a Christian. Number 4, James, Jesus' brother, became a Christian. And last of all, the tomb was empty. Now, before we look at each of these 5 minimal facts in detail, I do want to call attention to something that the video said. It said that each of these 5 facts deserves an explanation. It's true that each of these 5 facts may have several possible explanations, and many of those explanations don't involve a resurrection. However, since all of these facts are regarded as true, we have to remember that no explanation for a single fact can contradict any of the 4 other minimal facts and their explanations. So all of the explanations for all of these 5 facts have to be working together in harmony with one another. Now, if you're still writing down numbers 1 through 5, please pause the video and finish writing your answers down. Otherwise, we'll continue with our look at the first minimal fact. Number 1, Jesus died by crucifixion. Now, fact number 1 obviously is not talking about his resurrection specifically, but about his death. Of course, in order to have a resurrection, you need to have a death. And maybe you're also thinking, well, yeah, duh, of course he died by crucifixion. Well, there are some people who believe, like Jehovah's Witnesses, that Jesus actually wasn't crucified, that he was nailed to a wooden pole. But there are others that don't believe that Jesus died by crucifixion, that he never died. There's a few outliers out there who will occasionally throw out the idea that Jesus faked his death somehow, something that's called the swoon theory. And maybe you can see the appeal of that to people who don't want Jesus' resurrection to be factually true. That if Jesus never died, well then he never rose from the dead. But an impartial source, that is the Journal of the American Medical Association, said in an article back in 1986 that the swoon theory is rubbish. It said, accordingly, interpretations based on the assumption that Jesus did not die on the cross appear to be at odds with modern medical knowledge. End quote. So there's just too much evidence and too much agreement here that Jesus died by crucifixion. I mean, you got all the historical witnesses. You got the massive amount of blood loss that would have happened. You've got the testimony of the Roman soldiers who, remember, these guys were professional killers. They knew when somebody was dead. They were good at their job. And also the Apostle John's testimony of the blood and the water coming out of the spear wound, indicating that Jesus suffered a medical condition called hypovolemic shock. Now, I really appreciate John's testimony in his gospel about that blood and water, because John wasn't a doctor, of course, and he didn't know what hypovolemic shock was. In fact, nobody back then did. He was just recording what he observed. But what modern medicine has discovered is that when a human body is put through the kind of stress that Jesus was prior to his crucifixion and then being crucified, well, if that lining around the lungs or the heart is pierced, like with a spear, both blood and water are going to pour out. So the medical condition matches what we know of with what Jesus went through. Number 2, his disciples were convinced that he rose from the dead and appeared to them. Now, when you and I say that we believe that Jesus rose from the dead, that's actually very different than when the disciples said that they saw Jesus rise from the dead and they believe it. Because, well, the disciples are the ones who claim they saw Jesus alive after he had died. And so if the disciples then knew the resurrection of Jesus was a lie or a hoax because they made it up, well, that's very different than for us, because we're just believing the words of someone else. The disciples, they're in a position to know whether or not this whole thing about the resurrection is true or if it's a lie or a hoax. And if it's a lie and a hoax because they made it up, well, when you look at everything, you will see that this has to be then by far the greatest hoax and conspiracy in recorded history to get so many people to believe this. Now, speaking of conspiracies, right now as I'm putting together the content for this video, the COVID-19 global pandemic has been going on for a couple of years. Now, early on in the pandemic, lots and lots of businesses, you might remember this, some of you who are old enough, the businesses, events, and so on, excuse me, got a sneeze coming. But these things were all shut down as people were encouraged to stay at home and stay safe from this virus. Well, some people theorize on Facebook and other social media platforms that this lockdown was nothing more than a conspiracy to overthrow our country. Now, before we continue, I'm going to remove the video feed of me because there's something that I actually want to show you, but I need all of the screen space that I can get. So anyway, getting back to what I was going to say, someone I know was quite upset by all of these conspiracy theories that were out there because they didn't really put a lot of thought into it. And in response, he posted this meme on his Facebook wall that you see on the screen, where it says, "Faking a major event would require thousands of people. Try managing a project. Getting 12 people to do what they are supposed to on time without blabbing early is nearly impossible." A little bit of an overstatement maybe, but not necessarily far off. He goes on, "My gut is that most conspiracy theorists have never been project managers. Their optimism is adorable." A little bit of shade throwing them there at the end. But anyway, this person who posted this meme on his Facebook page also wrote, "Honestly, though it's kind of a joke, this post captures part of why I truly don't understand the COVID is being wildly exaggerated people. I know they want it to be true, but for it to be true, you'd have to have agreement between freaking, don't use that word, but that's what he wrote, freaking many national governments and health agencies, and state governments and health agencies, and local governments and health agencies, and hospitals and nurses and doctors and coroners and testing labs and meat packing companies and more, that it's simply not possible. And if it were, we should celebrate the single greatest global coordinated agreement and plan in the history of humanity." And he is dead on with that. Now, I'm not going to get into the politics of his statement or the meme, but he is very hitting the fat head on the nail on this one in regard to how conspiracies work. So let me pause here just for a moment. I'm going to bring the video feed of me back up real quick. Now the question I have, was the story of the resurrection nothing more than a conspiracy that Jesus' disciples hatched? Well, I'd like to share with you part of a private message that I shared with this person. I wrote, in parts of it here, when I read everything you said and the meme said about conspiracy theories, I couldn't help but apply those words to the resurrection of Jesus. That if the claims of his resurrection are simply a conspiracy, it took massive coordination and unrivaled determination to pull it off. It would take a massive amount of propaganda to convince hostile opponents like Saul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul, to believe in the resurrection. And to prove my point further, we're going to watch a video that I think just beautifully, through the medium of satire and humor, sums up the truth that the disciples weren't just concocting their own fake made-up religion. And I hope that you're able to get the humor. Some 7th graders get it, they laugh. Others are kind of like, okay, I don't get this, whatever. But hopefully you get it, and we'll enjoy it and learn something from it. So let's watch the video.
Hello, Peter.
Hello, Paul.
So you know how we were talking the other day about exploiting the life of Jesus by starting our own made-up religion?
Yes.
I think I figured out what we should do.
What's that?
Let's say that Jesus proved that he was the Son of God by rising from the dead.
Okay, but won't people be able to disprove that in like 5 seconds by just going to his grave and seeing his body?
I wasn't finished.
All right, so I'm guessing we tell people that, since Jesus rose from the dead, they can too, if they give us lots of money.
No. We're not going to get rich off of this.
We were not? Well, do I at least get lots of chicks or something? How is this conspiracy going to make my life better?
It's not. In fact, your life is going to be way worse.
What?
Yes, you're going to leave your job and your home and be really poor, and everyone is going to hate you, and then people are probably going to crucify you upside down. And I'm going to kill a bunch of Christians at first and then give up my rock star status among the Pharisees to be a Christian myself. And then people are going to beat me up and throw rocks at my head and put me in prison and then kill me too.
So we are going to start a fake religion that gives us absolutely no monetary or social or emotional or psychological or physical benefit whatsoever.
Right.
And then we are going to die for preaching the same resurrection story that we know is a total lie because we made it up.
Yes. Oh, and also, we're going to need to find like 11 more guys to do the same thing.
Dude, the only way a bunch of people are going to flush their lives down the toilet and die horrible deaths for preaching the resurrection is if they actually saw it happen.
Yeah, I know. That's why it's going to be the best conspiracy ever.
You really need to stop drinking out of lead cups. So are we at least going to oppress people by telling them that God will condemn them if they don't follow a bunch of rules that we made up?
No, the core of our fake religion is going to be that people are free because God condemned his own Son in their place. So are you in, or not?
All right, but only if I get to be the first pope.
Fine. But don't expect a giant hat.
I love that video. The point here is that people are not going to willingly die for something that they know is a lie because they made it up. I mean, think about this. People won't even live for a lie if it doesn't gain them something. You know, some monetary or social or emotional or psychological or physical benefit, as the video says. Now, in the movie The Case for Christ, and if you haven't seen it, a little spoiler alert here, but there's a scene where a man who is actually innocent of a crime pleads guilty. Now the question is, why would he plead guilty if he knew that he was innocent? Well, the reason is because all of the evidence was stacked against him, and he hoped that the judge would show him some leniency. I mean, had he maintained his innocence and then got convicted of shooting the police officer, he feared that his sentence would be even worse. And so he felt he had no option. He had to lie. And, you know, this is the position that the disciples found themselves in for preaching the resurrection in many ways. That, yeah, it was true, but it gained them nothing in this world. Instead, they lost everything, including their own lives. You know, the only reason why they would continue doing this, preaching the resurrection, believe the resurrection, and willing to die for the resurrection teaching, even after seeing, like, for instance, one of the Jesus' apostles, Apostle James, being struck down by the leaders of the Jews, you know, then it's as if they knew it was true, and it gained them something after they died. And that's really the only way they would continue doing this. Well, what does Jesus say? In addition to rising from the dead, he told them that whoever believes in him will have eternal life. Now, the following charts on the screen over here on the left side really show how the apostles died. And I'm not going to go through all those charts. I mean, you can pause the video and look at each of them more closely if you wish. But you'll notice that at least with some of the apostles, there are different traditions on how they died. But while there isn't, maybe some certainty on who died in what way, there is one banner headline news for just about each of these, that whether it was by stoning or by the sword or whatever, the general consensus is that the bulk of these early witnesses, the apostles, died as a result of a bloody death, that they were murdered for their faith, with the exception of the apostle John, who was the only apostle who was believed to have died from natural causes. Now, if you'd like to learn more about the apostles and the records of their death, I've actually included a helpful link in the description where I found these images, and you can look at it there. But the point is that their willingness to die for this message, when it gained them nothing, and not to, die fighting, of course, but to be like lambs led to the slaughter, really demands an explanation, doesn't it? And when you think about it, the best explanation that fits all of the facts, this one and the previous one and the other three coming up and all the others that are out there, is that they saw Jesus alive after he died, and that his resurrection gained them something, or at least they believed that it would gain them something. And that's not all. Even the atheist Gerd Lederman, in his What Really Happened to Jesus, conceded that, and I quote, "It may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ." Whoa! Just think about this for a second. Who said this? I mean, this is an atheist who's just saying this right now. Now, of course, if you go on, he tries to explain these occurrences away by saying that they're just visions and hallucinations. But really, when you dig into this just a little bit, he shows a complete lack of understanding on how visions and hallucinations work. Because when you have groups of people gathered together, as often was the case when Jesus made his resurrection appearances, all of those people are not going to be sharing the same vision or hallucination. Because visions and hallucinations are unique to the individual. They're a lot like dreams in that regard. They're not going to be like dreams. You don't share dreams among groups of people. So, for example, if you're at a slumber party, a sleepover, and you fell asleep and you had this awesome dream, you wouldn't be able to wake up and then tell everyone, "Hey, come hop into my dream and join my dream." It doesn't work that way, and we know that each person's going to have their own individual dream, and in much the same way then, psychologists, psychiatrists know that you will have your own individual vision and hallucination. So, if vision and hallucination is not an option, and these occurrences were very real, that really leaves only one other possible explanation. I mean, legitimately, that Jesus actually appeared to these people. And again, Gerd, an atheist, even admits to it. Minimal fact number 3, Paul became a Christian. So it's true, people convert from other religions all the time. So the big question then is, well, what's so special about Paul? Well, in the court of law, there is something called the hearsay rule. In the picture, pretty much right beneath me, pretty much sums up what the hearsay rule is all about, and you can pause the video if you just want to take a quick look at it and learn a little bit more. But one thing that we learn in the hearsay rule, and really more like an exception to the hearsay rule, is that if an opponent admits that what you are saying is true, and thus admits the weakness of his own case and the strength of yours, it gives you credibility. So, let's consider then Saul of Tarsus, the Apostle Paul, but before he was apostle. I mean, he was, if you read through Acts, the first 9, 10 chapter or 8 chapters or so, You find out that, man, Paul was once an enemy of the church, and not just any enemy that thought Christians were wrong, but most likely the most notorious persecutor of Christians of his time. I mean, he was passionately convinced that he was serving God by hunting down Christians. And yet, that word suddenly comes to mind. Because suddenly he becomes a Christian as he's on his way to Damascus in Syria to arrest Christians. So this was not a gradual change of mind which had been slowly developing in Paul and gnawing away at him. This was a quick, radical, completely unexpected change from one religious belief to another. And really, when you stop and think about it, pretty much only one thing could have led to such a change in this moment. That he actually saw Jesus alive. And that's what he says happened. And here's the clincher, folks. This change from Pharisee and persecutor of Christians to one of the leading Christian apostles cost him something. Taking a look at the passage from 2 Corinthians, he says, I've done more hard work, been in prison more often, been whipped far more, and I've been close to death many times. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. 1 time I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I have spent a night and a day on the open sea. I have often been on journeys, in danger from rivers, in danger from robbers, in danger from my own people, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the wilderness, in danger on the sea, in danger among false brothers. I have worked hard and struggled. I've spent many sleepless nights. I've been hungry and thirsty. I've gone without food many times. I've been cold and lacked clothing. Besides those external matters, there is the daily pressure on me of my concern for all the churches. You know, Paul had it good as a persecutor of Christians. And he knew, probably better than most, exactly what Christians were facing. And so what would lead him to throw all that away, his favored status among the Pharisees, to go through that litany of suffering that I just read? Well, you don't make that switch at all, unless something incredible convinces you. And, well, we have an appearance of Jesus to the Apostle Paul. Now, Paul's radical transformation from persecutor to missionary, again, it demands an explanation. And you might be able to come up with others, but I think that really that the best one, the best explanation is that he's telling the truth when he said that he met the risen Jesus on the road to Damascus, because this change was just way, way, way too radical and dramatic and sudden. Number 4, a short one here. James, Jesus' half-brother, became a Christian. Now, the gospel writers Mark and John both report that none of Jesus' brothers believed in him while he was on earth. In fact, what we do learn also is that they were glaringly absent from Jesus' crucifixion. They weren't there at all. In fact, they didn't even come to support their grieving mom. I mean, that's how embarrassed they were by Jesus. And so Jesus then had to entrust his mother, Mary, to the care of the disciple John. And I think that should, again, tell us a bit about something how Jesus' siblings felt about him. That they thought of him as the family embarrassment. In fact, they even went so far as to confront Jesus and essentially dare him to perform a miracle. Now, in ancient Judaism, it was actually highly embarrassing for a rabbi's family not to accept him. And so the gospel writers obviously would have no motive for fabricating any sort of skepticism from his family if it weren't true. But that's what we see in the Bible, in the New Testament, in the Gospels. And later, the historian Josephus, a Jewish historian, reports that James, the brother of Jesus, was the leader of the Jerusalem church and was subsequently stoned to death because of his belief in his brother. So why did James's life change? Well, Apostle Paul tells us that the resurrected Jesus appeared to him. And there really is no other explanation for this. And James, isn't the only brother of Jesus that we hear about after the resurrection. His brother Jude, or Judas, whom the Bible book Jude is named after, also converted and became a leader of the church. The last minimal fact for us today is number 5. The tomb was empty. Now, I'd actually like to start this section out by reading a portion of the resurrection account from Matthew's Gospel. Matthew chapter 28, those selected verses there. After the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. Suddenly there was a great earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, he rolled away the stone and was sitting on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothing was as white as snow. The guards were so terrified of him that they shook and became like dead men. As they were on their way, there were some helpers of the guard who went into the city and reported to the chief priests everything that had happened. And when it says they were on their way, it talks about the ladies going to the tomb there in verse 11. So the question, why would the soldiers go to the chief priests and not back to their Roman superiors? I mean, that just sounds strange, doesn't it? Well, it's because they knew that it wouldn't end so well for them if they did go to their Roman leaders, if you get what I mean. But they hoped that the chief priests could smooth things over for them with the Roman authorities. So, how did this all go down? Well, the following Lutheran satire again more or less sums it up. Not entirely accurate in the wording, but the overall content and gist of it are there. And again, I hope that you find the humor in it.
Hey guys! Hey guys! Hey guys! Hey guys!
What?
Okay, so you know how Pilate told me to guard the tomb of that Jesus fellow that you guys just killed because he said he was the son of God?
Yes.
Yeah, so an angel just came down from heaven and there was an earthquake and it was like kapow, and he rolled away the stone and he said that Jesus ain't dead no more.
And?
And I figured that you'd want to know that because it totally proves that Jesus is the son of God.
Thank you for this information, young man. Please tell everyone that his disciples stole the body.
What? Why would I do that?
Well, if you go around telling people that Jesus rose from the dead, people are going to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. Yes, and of course, that's preposterous.
Well, clearly you men have hardened your hearts and despise the gospel, but I will not. I will not deny what I saw. I will not flee from the truth to any and all who will listen. I will shout from the rooftops that the stone has been rolled away, that the tomb is empty, and that
Here's some money.
and that those disciples stole Jesus' body when I wasn't looking.
Yeah, that's a pretty funny way of summing up what happened. Funny, but also at the same time sad because of what the Sanhedrin did. But let's actually read the actual account from Matthew chapter 28. After the chief priests had assembled with the elders and had reached a decision, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers and said, "You are to say, 'His disciples came at night and stole him away while we were sleeping.' If the governor hears about it, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." After the soldiers took the money, they did as they were instructed. And this story has been repeated among the Jews until this day. I'll say this. Jesus' enemies really did the church a huge favor in admitting that the tomb was empty. Now, is an empty tomb an admission of the resurrection? No, but it is the first symptom. I mean, you can't have a resurrection without having an empty tomb. So, just to help paint the picture here, set the table, help you understand what's going on, you've got three different groups of people at the center of this story. You got Jesus' followers. Second of all, you have the Romans. And third, you have the religious leaders of the Jews who are made up of the chief priests, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees. Now, the last two, the Romans and the Jewish authorities or leaders, well, they tolerated each other. They didn't really care for each other. They weren't allies, but they weren't openly hostile with each other either because, well, you know, it's sometimes just easier to live and let live. However, when it came to Jesus, they had a common enemy, and as the saying goes, you probably heard it, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Now, both the Romans and the chief priests had every reason to keep Jesus in that tomb. The Romans feared an uprising if the disciples faked the resurrection, and the chief priests, well, they hated Jesus. And so the chief priests then had a temporary ally in the Roman soldiers who came running to them for help. I mean, these soldiers, they had zero motivation to lie to the priests, and the chief priests knew this. But even though they knew the resurrection had happened, because they heard it from these soldiers who had no reason to lie to them, the chief priests still decided to cover it up with a bribe. And the soldiers who saw the proof of the resurrection took that money and spread the cover story that the disciples took the body while the soldiers slept. Now, this is really a pathetic cover story that crumbles under the slightest bit of scrutiny. Because first of all, Roman soldiers, they didn't sleep on the job. I mean, these guys were professionally trained men. There were severe consequences for sleeping on the job, and it just wouldn't have happened. The second reason is that the tomb, it says, was sealed. And that seal was likely a large mold of clay that was imprinted with the Roman imperial seal and attached to the stone with a rope. And you can't break that seal and the ropes quietly. You're going to be making an even greater ruckus than that by moving that heavy sealing stone that blocked the entrance to the tomb. So almost nobody is going to sleep through that sort of commotion, and especially Roman soldiers who were trained and thus on their guard and would have responded to the first suspicious noise. Third of all, the disciples, by their own admission, were too busy cowering in fear, and they weren't in any emotional condition to be able to organize and mount a successful raid upon fully armed and trained Roman soldiers. I mean, my guess is there were more than just two soldiers. We always hear or see it depicted of the soldiers at the tomb, and they're just two of them. I doubt it. With the number of disciples Jesus had, there would have undoubtedly been more. But what do we see? We see that the disciples fled into the dark of night when Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. We see that only John was at Jesus' crucifixion. We see that they're still hiding behind locked doors after they heard that Jesus had risen from the dead. These guys weren't professionally trained soldiers. They were fishermen, a tax collector, and other peasant-like individuals whose occupations we don't know. But these guys certainly were not trained soldiers. Well, about 75% of scholars regard it as a historical fact that the tomb was empty. And it would have been impossible for the Christian faith to get off the ground in Jerusalem if Jesus' body were still there in the tomb, because the Jewish and Roman authorities could have simply gone over to the tomb, viewed his corpse, and the whole hubbub would have been silenced. But instead, just the opposite of that happened. And so as we wrap things up, I want to let you know that there are plenty of plausible explanations for each of these individual facts alone that I haven't mentioned. However, none of those other alternate sets of explanations account for all the other facts, and so they have to be dismissed. The best explanation for these 5 minimal facts, that is the explanation that doesn't leave out any of the facts or strains to make anything fit, is that Jesus did return from the dead. And as I stated at the beginning of this supplemental lesson, the great thing about the Christian faith is that it is based on factual history that can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And that gives me a tremendous amount of comfort and confidence in the resurrection. I'm not just happy and hoping that my sins are forgiven. I know that they are forgiven. I'm not just hoping that when I die I'll go to heaven. I know I will go to heaven because of what Jesus did for me. And knowing these things that have a solid historical basis really, I think, helps me through those dark moments of fear and uncertainty. And I hope that this little exercise that we've done here today gives you that same certainty as well in the good news of the resurrection. But anyway, that brings us to the end of this supplemental lesson on the resurrection of Jesus. Again, as I said earlier, there is so much that can be learned about this subject, and we're only really kind of just scratching the surface here in this video. So if it interests you, go ahead and look into it more and be amazed at what you find. But until then, have a great day. God bless you. See you in class.